Hey, Kylie, thanks for being here.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. We are going to talk about something that I don't talk about nearly enough. We're always talking about the training and the running and all the workouts we do and all the strategy that goes into that. But I'm excited to talk to you about all the other things that can really impact our performance as runners. And a big one of them is our nutrition. But before we get into all that, and I know we're going to go down the rabbit hole, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background as an athlete, Kylie.
So, all right, yeah, my background as an athlete. I was a runner since I've been 10 years. I was 10 years old. My dad is a Olympic trials marathon qualifier, and grew up in that household. Ran high school, ran at the University of Richmond in college, and then post collegiately, I ran with some groups in Boulder when I moved out to Colorado, um, and tried to qualify for the trials myself, but missed it by a few minutes back in 2012, and then switched to trail. And honestly, I love nothing against road running, but trail running has been life changing. It's just, I feel like the community has been really great for me, just a little bit more laid back at times. And it's allowed for me to just get out and explore the area where I live. In the mountains now. I live near Aspen, Colorado. So mostly compete in trail running events now and do some Nordic skiing and ski mountaineering too.
Oh, that's so fun. And I love how you're having this like new season of running after, your road racing season after your college training. That's just really fun. And you certainly live in probably one of the best states for amazing trail running. So, yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about endurance runners and the mistakes that we make with our eating and nutrition habits. Let's start with common mistakes. I think you're a dietitian that works with so many endurance athletes, runners, also triathletes, and I wonder if you happen to see the same nutrition or diet problems that come up repeatedly.
Yeah, I do, and I think it's by no mistake of anyone out there because there is a lot of conflicting nutrition information out there, and I feel like people get confused. And um, that's what I try to do with my messaging is to clarify some of that and try to um, sometimes it might sound oversimplified, but when I work one on one with someone, we're going to dive into details on their specifics of their nutrition. But overall, I want the message to be clear of things that should be happening for overall fueling strategy. So, in regards to race fueling, I would say like oftentimes there are things that are missed. If someone's having stomach issues, they might start thinking, oh, well, I need to eat less or I need to change up my fuel source. And that might be the case, but also it could be that you need to eat more. It could be that you need to dial in your fluid and electrolyte strategy. So thinking outside the box there when troubleshooting your fueling plan. When we look at daily nutrition, I think there are a lot of fads out there. So we always joke, well, you and I have joked on my Instagram about, so and so down the street is doing this latest diet trend. And for endurance athletes, that might not be the best strategy to do the newest diet trend or the newest thing that you need to cut out of your diet. I think it's talked about on the other end of the spectrum, it's talked about eating enough. And I think that that concept of eating enough, people don't really understand what that means because they're like, well, like, do I just eat until I'm full? Or like, what if I'm never hungry? And so there's like all these things that happen with people where they don't really understand what enough is for them. And that's the piece where, someone like myself or another sports dietitian can help try to figure out what your needs are to match your training day and what does that look like from a sustainability perspective for you, to try and figure out what's going to work long term. But I'm not about like extreme restriction and cutting things out of the diet and some magical like supplement that so and so said is gonna, help with performance. I do like to take an open mind if there's, new research out there, but I think that can ultimately confuse people if they're, just seeing one study and saying like this is the end all be all to a situation. So I would say that's a problematic area. And then the supplement piece, always a problematic area. Like, what should I take? What should I not be taking? Do I need 50 different supplements? Do I not? And wading through that again is difficult. Like, for the most part, you don't necessarily need 50 different supplements, but in certain cases, certain supplements might actually be beneficial to you depending on what you're trying to achieve. So again, working with somebody that understands like evidence-based science, and then also companies that might be reputable, so you might be able to then gather like what might be beneficial for you, can be helpful when you're working with someone that's a professional in the area. So does that kind of, I mean, it's so broad. There's so many things, I would say, so many common mistakes that people make that it's difficult for me almost to pick out like all of the different things that people get confused about or make mistakes on with their nutrition.
Yeah, it's almost like an endless list of, of things you maybe could get wrong. But at the same time, it's also something that we probably shouldn't overcomplicate. I'd love to talk a little bit more about not eating enough. You mentioned how a lot of runners don't understand what enough means. How do you determine what is enough? Do you actually have to go get metabolic testing and figure out your basal metabolic rate and how much you're exercising? Is it that complicated, or is there a little workaround to figure out how many calories we need? And I'm also curious if you break things down a little bit more granularly into macronutrients as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think so. This is where got to tread lightly with someone's history. Like, some of my athletes, yeah, we actually go and they get metabolic testing done because it's something that they feel confident that they want to learn, and that they feel like they're using it as a learning tool and not an overly obsessive tool. And so with certain people, I will do that. But for a lot of the population that I work with, we don't need to go to that extreme. And there are guidelines and standards that we can use to estimate what your needs are for different days of training for protein, carbohydrates, and fats. And normally I'm doing that versus like straight calorie counting, because a lot of people have already negative relationships with calories. So our macronutrients are going to add up to caloric intake. So taking a macronutrient focus and then applying visuals to those macronutrients can be really helpful, because for a lot of people, counting numbers and obsessing over that, again, it can be triggering and just really not productive overall, too time consuming for them as well. So things like that, think numbers can be used maybe as a learning tool, but really ultimately having confidence in a visual perspective can be really nice with like protein, carb, and fat consumption. And then I think something that's lost in the endurance space is that intuition piece too. Like the ability, we get so caught up in like the stress of our training, the stress of our lives. We are kind of mechanical maybe and just like getting in food or not getting in food. And we start to forget about hunger and fullness and what that actually looks like. And that can be individualized, but getting some awareness around hunger and fullness cues and how do I actually feel? How does this food make me feel? Am I satisfied? Am I not? Can be a really helpful tool in helping you kind of determine like what your needs are without, getting metabolic testing and whatnot. I think it's important to remember that our bodies are not calculated machine. So even if you have a metabolic reading, like you're not hooked up to a metabolic cart 24/7. So you're not fully going to know what your energy requirements are. It's still all an estimation. So being able to read your body is really important. I think something that is also lost in on that side of things is like just eating intuitively. Like people get stressed about that because they're like, well, that doesn't work for me. And like, I'm not hungry because I'm endurance training and like I lose my appetite. So I think having the ability to be, I call it intentional, but also intuitive is really important, and combining the two and knowing that intentionally, like after a hard workout or after a long training session, I might not be hungry, but I need to fuel myself. So those are just some of the kind of tips I usually give people. And then depending on the person too, like the use of something like a tracking tool like Chronometer or something might be a way to get a look at what you're doing. But again, there's still discrepancy there. We know that the tracking tools have inaccuracies, there's human error, and then there's fitness tool error as well, like our watches and Whoop straps and all of that are going to have up to like 20% inaccuracy as well. So we can get ideas and trends from these things, but we have to know how to read our bodies too.
Yeah, it seems it's just like with our training as well. You know, there's always value in having a fancy GPS watch that tells you all these metrics. But if you
Mm-hmm.
can't also layer in some intuitive feelings of how you're feeling when you're running a workout or in a race or a long run, you know, you end up missing some things. And so I love this marriage of using some of this data in these tools in a really strategic way, but then also relying on just how you feel after you eat and what you think you need. It does seem like a lot of this is habit related. You know, I think we all understand intellectually that we have to fuel our running, but a lot of us are parents or have crazy schedules or just are super busy or we travel a lot, and then it becomes more challenging to be able to eat enough food to support the training that we're doing. Are there any, you know, simple habit changes that you've found to be really effective for endurance runners who might struggle to get in the number of calories or even carbohydrate that they need?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it unfortunately it does require a little bit of upfront effort trying to figure out like what that's going to look like for you. I think this is the one of the foundational skills that I like to teach athletes is the planning process and like thinking ahead, like do I have a big training week coming up, what does that look like, and then in my planning process, can I think ahead for that and be able to like have things on hand that will help me because I know I'm going to be busy, or I know I'm going to run the kids places, or I'm traveling for work. And then if you have those things in place that you can use in your toolbox, then that can help you meet your needs. So things like examples might be where you have a hard time getting calories in on increased training days, but you know that you need a higher amount of fats because they are going to give you extra calories overall. So do you have nut butter packets available? Do you drizzle a little bit of extra olive oil in your normal meals? Do you have, I don't know, just making sure you have avocado available or something, you know, like making sure you have the staples to help you achieve those increased needs. Carbohydrate wise, sometimes we need to maybe think outside of our box and think through, okay, well, if I'm short on time and I'm exercising a lot this day and I have increased carb needs, maybe I should have some juice available. And like some people out there might freak out because they like are like, oh my gosh, juice is like pure sugar and I shouldn't be drinking that, etc. And everyone's preferences might be different, but the reality is like underfueling overall might be worse for you and your blood sugar control than having some juice to help you meet your carb needs. And I think like I even work with athletes on like okay, like having this juice pre or post exercise could be a really good option for you to have a quick carb source to get your energy up or replace glycogen stores. Like if you're really worried about that, or like pairing your pairing this juice with a protein source could help keep your blood sugar a little bit more balanced. So you get your carbs and you get some protein in to keep your blood sugar more balanced. So there are nutrition strategies that you can use to try and make things more convenient for you, but also meet your needs in a way that's going to work. I do the same thing with like people that are traveling for business, etc. Like, what easy snacks could you pack for yourself so that you can prepare yourself when you're on your business trip? Or is there a convenience store nearby? What could you get at the convenience store that would help you meet your needs? And thinking about that ahead of time versus in the moment. Like I was just talking with an athlete earlier that's a fitness trainer and a runner, and she like works out literally like 25 hours a week, like with everything all together. And we're trying to think through ways that she can like pack things to go with her and grab things conveniently, etc. So, thinking through a core list of items to kind of help you if you know that like carbs are really hard for you to get in, or protein or fats, like whatever macronutrients are hard for you. Thinking through that and then having that available for you so that you don't have that decision fatigue. Sometimes the decision fatigue in the moment is also what prevents people from fueling themselves, because they're like, oh, I don't really want to think about this. This is not going to be convenient for me. I really just, I might as well not fuel.
Kylee, I had a small can of pineapple juice earlier today on a meeting because I didn't really have time to eat anything. And I did have this really interesting, like, split-second moment of guilt where I thought I was going to be judged because I was drinking juice and I'm a running coach. I need to be advising people on healthy habits. And it was just a really interesting thing. I was like, no, I just went for a run. I don't really have time right now for a whole sandwich or something. So I'm just going to have this can of pineapple juice. And yeah, it was exactly what you were just mentioning. And it held me over until I could actually eat some real food. I want to talk a little bit more about protein, though. I think this is a macronutrient that a lot of runners don't think too much about because our performances are not fueled by protein, but nevertheless, protein is, in my mind, maybe the most important macronutrient, although we can have a brawl about that later. Tell me about some problems you see with endurance runners and protein. Like, obviously, not getting enough is going to hamper your recovery, but I saw you talk in another venue about how having protein not spaced evenly throughout the day can also be a problem. I'd love to hear your thoughts more on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look from a perspective of maximum muscle protein synthesis rates, whether it's like somebody that's strength training or doing endurance sports, part of the goal is to break down and then repair. And so in order to do that, if we actually spread our protein out throughout the day more evenly, it can help us reach those maximum muscle protein synthesis rates and help with maximum rate of recovery and adaptation. And so when I'm working with people, I like to evaluate not only are you getting in the things that you need with protein or carbs or fats, but how does that look throughout the day, and how are you kind of timing things, I guess. I think with protein specifically, I like to think about it in boxes, like trying to fill your boxes with like smaller amounts of protein throughout the day, just to be able to conceptualize what that looks like for you. And the other thing I just thought I forgot about this piece too would be the blood sugar balance piece. So thinking through, that when you have your protein spread out throughout the day, it can keep your blood sugar. It allows for carbohydrate to release into the bloodstream a little bit more slowly, keep the blood sugar a little bit more even throughout the day and give you a more steady energy. It can allow, if we don't have as many blood sugar spikes and drops, it might keep your inflammation levels more stable, and get that recovery time, help you feeling more recovered throughout your day. So lots of reasons why spreading protein out throughout the day is important, and not just maybe that amount overall. And then, yeah, strategy wise, I like for people to think about filling their boxes up throughout the day to kind of achieve that goal of meeting needs. And then really trying to think through, I would say the people that struggle the most with this are going to be plant-based athletes. But when I've worked with my plant-based athletes, even those that are really struggling getting in like 50% of their needs at the beginning when we get started, we always brainstorm through like higher protein snack ideas, and like, things like dried edamame can be a great source of protein. So trying to think outside of their box of like a protein bar as the only option to get in protein can be really helpful. So that's where like, it takes, I want to bring this back to, with anything that you're working on with your nutrition, it takes a little bit of effort up front to figure out what that's going to look like for you and the how you're going to make it happen. And then moving forward, you have some strategies or nutrition skills in place. I like to call it my adaptable athletes. So you can adapt in any situation, whether you're traveling or, in a place that you can only go to the convenience store or whatever. You're able to adapt to that situation.
I actually think what you just said is so critically important that I want to highlight it, because I think, we understand as athletes that we have to exercise differently than the average person to accomplish our athletic goals. But that also means that we typically have to eat a little bit differently than the average person, because it needs to fuel our exercise, which is very different than the average person. And I think having a plan ahead of time is so helpful, but also not something most of us ever even think about, because eating is something that we're going to be doing whether we're running or not running. It's something that we all have to do every day, no matter what. And so we don't usually put a plan around our diet unless we have some weight loss goal. But if we're athletes, our goal is fueling those workouts and recovering properly from those workouts. So having a plan and just thinking ahead, just like you would with your training, is probably, from a habits perspective, I think just as important, because it's going to allow you to make the decisions you need to make in the moment, so that you don't succumb to decision fatigue, so that you don't just make the easy, stress-free choice. You actually have some things prepped. You have the, food available at your house, and it really allows you to make all the decisions that are going to really help your training. Can this same thing happen with calories? Like, can you not spread out your calories appropriately, and can that negatively impact your training? And the specific reason I'm asking for this, because I know a lot of runners backload their day when it comes to calories. They might eat a small breakfast, a medium lunch, and then they'll have a big dinner, and then maybe a good size post-bed snack or something like that. Is that problematic in any way?
I think it can, for some athletes, be a problem in the sense that it can lead to like binge episodes in the evening, because you're just getting so ravenous that later on you like end up eating more than maybe what you would have originally needed if you were able to spread things out throughout the day. And it can affect blood sugar levels, etc. I think overall, as long as you're getting in the energy intake that you need, if that works for you, great. But I also find that it can affect athletes' sleep quality too. And when we look at, having big meals before bedtime, and even just like very high carbohydrate intake right before bedtime might cause some micro awakenings for people when they're sleeping and affect that sleep quality for recovery. So thinking about is this actually optimal for my overall recovery strategy? maybe not, again, like if you're meeting energy needs, might be okay, but I would argue that spreading it out a little bit more throughout the day, energy intake wise, would be beneficial.
Could either backloading your calories or even backloading your protein have an effect on how sore you are on a day-to-day basis? Because I know you were talking about muscle protein synthesis, and having protein in a more regular pattern can really help with muscle protein synthesis. A lot of athletes hear that and they just think muscle growth, hypertrophy. But as runners, a lot of that for us is repairing all of the micro trauma that we experience when we do a long run or a workout. Um, and ultimately, like, I don't want to be that sore. I want to be able to run day to day. Is my protein intake directly responsible for how I'm feeling on a day-to-day basis with regard to soreness?
I think it's a little bit complicated because actually, like, if you don't get enough carbohydrates in, that might affect your muscle soreness and recovery too. So I think when we think about it, overall energy intake is going to be king. And then from there, it might be a little bit more individualized, in regards to like someone might be able to tolerate like a little bit less carbohydrate but more protein and not feel as sore, and vice versa. So I think like thinking about experimenting. I always like for the athletes that we work with to think about experimenting with different things. Like I will experiment with people for different pre-bedtime protein, higher protein snacks, or maybe having a little bit more carb, but like still having some protein in their bedtime snack, and figuring out what helps them feel the most recovered. Because I think it is, while we are in a sense generalizing a little bit in some of the things that we're talking about, I think it's important to remember that we are all individuals, and I think we will respond differently to different foods and different combinations of foods, etc. So that's that more personalized approach, I would say, is kind of figuring out what's going to work for you.
Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, Kylie, and assume that you're probably not a fan of intermittent fasting or any kind of restricted eating pattern where you're definitely not eating for a certain period of time throughout the day. Would I be wrong there? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I try to keep an open mind with this kind of thing, but we work a lot with disordered eating, eating disorders, and REDS, relative energy deficiency in sport. And intermittent fasting does not help those athletes with those conditions or the restrictive thoughts, et cetera. It actually perpetuates them. And from a sport specific, endurance sport specific perspective, looking at trying a couple of the things we were just talking about, looking at timing and spread of nutrients throughout your day, like your protein intake. If you're intermittent fasting, you might not be able to spread out that protein as much throughout the day. Are you maximally absorbing micronutrients? Like it's hard to say, but it makes it more difficult to get in your needs nutrition wise throughout the day. Now, exceptions would be if somebody has is like a diabetic. There is research emerging that might be beneficial for blood sugar control and changes in the mitochondria. But even in our endurance athletes that would be diabetic, probably still wouldn't recommend it for them. But more the general population, it might be a topic of discussion for someone like that. But usually with endurance athletes, we're not doing intermittent fasting or recommending intermittent fasting.
I want to ask you, Kylie, a little bit about eating before bed again. I know that it can negatively impact your sleep. I'm wondering if certain lower carbohydrate foods would have less of an impact on your sleep, and whether or not it's actually more beneficial to eat a protein rich or a carbohydrate rich pre-bedtime snack.
So again, I think this comes down to individual responses, because I actually have worked with athletes that have worn continuous glucose monitors, and they will test certain carbohydrate rich foods and will have different blood sugar responses than maybe what they were even expecting. So like oatmeal or something they might think it might not cause a spike in blood sugar, but it's actually causing a pretty big spike in blood sugar for them. Or an apple might cause someone to spike it one way and another person not spiking as much. So I think we do have to remember that there's still, again, that individuality on how we respond to foods, carbohydrate rich foods in general. Overall, though, I tend to recommend a higher protein snack before bedtime because it can promote sleep quality and muscle repair when you are sleeping. So trying to maybe focus on that a little bit might be beneficial. And then I usually say, like, yeah, combine it with a little bit of carbohydrate, but just my main thing is like some of my athletes that just eat like a bowl of cereal before bed with no protein with that, or a piece of toast with jam or something. There's nothing wrong with that, but I have them compare that intake to a higher protein snack like a yogurt with a little bit of granola and a little bit of fruit, and they notice a difference in they're not waking up in the middle of the night hungry. They feel more refreshed when they get up in the morning. And there is some research to suggest that doing that higher protein snack before bedtime does actually promote muscle repair and recovery. So thinking through, like, what could that look like for you? Usually I recommend like 10 to 20 grams of high quality protein before bed. And then carbohydrate wise, 30 to 45 grams max. And maybe, we have to be mindful of how much we are eating before bedtime, right before bedtime too, because that high GI load right before bed, that can be hard because digestion can slow when you're sleeping. So, that might make things difficult on your sleep too. So that's why I kind of give some parameters for the pre-bedtime snack because it keeps it kind of within check. Obviously you can have a little bit more. I'm not limiting anyone on this, but some people like to have some guidelines.
Do you recommend continuous glucose monitors for non-diabetics? I've heard dietitians come down so firmly on either side of this debate. And my thinking is just that if you're curious and if there are all of these individual responses to certain foods, more data can help you make better decisions about your eating, not just what you're eating, but also when you're eating it. So I can see it as only a good thing as long as it's not going to, predispose you to any kind of unhealthy eating habits.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is where people get caught up in like taking the extreme one side or the other. I don't take that extreme for continuous glucose monitors because I have successfully used them with athletes for what you're saying. So a couple of things, like I've found benefit with them for athletes that have higher A1C and they're in the pre-diabetic category, but like they are vegan and they don't understand, like they actually are getting protein in, they don't understand why their A1C is higher. So we might look at like what their trends are in their blood sugar. I've used it for athletes having GI distress or in their fueling plan and trying to figure out what options might make them feel better during their exercise. I've used it for athletes that have rebound hypoglycemia, so their blood sugar spikes and drops at the beginning of exercise and they feel like they might pass out. So trying to figure out what food options might be beneficial for them pre-exercise and then trying to keep that blood sugar more stable during exercise. It's been really interesting to look at individual responses to gels and food blends. Some people using whole food blends do not have a great response to like Spring or Mirror Energy. Like they can't get their blood sugar up. And it actually makes they feel lower energy, and it makes sense because their blood sugar is not going up very high. And so being able to look through and visualize that data with a CGM has been really beneficial for the people that I have used it with. Now, the counterpoint, because again, we work with a lot of disordered eating, et cetera, is that it can make people more obsessive, give them more data, and then that's just overwhelming, and it takes away from that intuition that we were talking about earlier, and like not paying attention to the signs that your body's giving you. So being careful, like if you're somebody that does have those kind of tendencies and habits, it might not be the best choice for them, but I can see pluses and minuses to using it, and do work with athletes on using it in certain situations. And I've even had athletes, I've worked with athletes one-on-one that I've requested that they request it from their doctor and get a CGM so that we can get more data to see what's going on.
Yeah, if you see me running around with a CGM on my arm, you'll know that I'm firmly on the bandwagon. I would love it. I think it's so interesting. I would love to look at my, blood sugar levels at every hour of the day. I just think that's so fascinating. My grandmother happens to be a type 1 diabetic, and whenever I visit her, she's still doing the old school prick your finger and test your blood every morning. And I do that when I'm visiting her because I'm just so curious what it might be. Kylee, let me ask you some rapid fire questions. These are loaded questions. And so there's not going to be really an easy, good answer for you here, but I'd love to know your thoughts. Do you think there's any highly underrated and highly overrated fuel options out there for distance runners?
I do actually feel like just traditional gels get such a bad rap. Like even just like a goo energy gel, I will chat with athletes and they're like, I would never touch that, or like, a Cliff energy gel or something. And I think that they can actually be really beneficial to people. And even if you're not going to use it in your race, you could think about like some of these gels are getting quite expensive. So you could actually use some Cliff or goo that might be a little bit more affordable. And you could use that in part of your training. And then as you're getting closer to your race, you want to practice with what you're going to use on race day. But I think it's a great choice for people to use during exercise. Now, some people might cringe and don't like the texture or whatever, which is fine. Like everyone has individual preferences. But the point is I think like unnecessarily demonizing those is not the best. And then I think overrated are whole food options, because I think there's such a focus on using whole foods these days to fuel your exercise that the thought process is not there. Like if you're training for a half marathon or a marathon and you're thinking about all I should use is whole foods, you're in the wrong school of thought there, because you need quick energy source for quick carbohydrate source to give you the energy you need to be running quicker paces for a half marathon. If we're getting into ultra distance events, then we can talk about whole foods more. But I think for half marathon, you should be using more traditional fuel sources. That could include maple syrup gels or honey gels or something like that if you're wanting to go that route. But the whole food options like eating potatoes or snacking on a bar during a marathon or a half, that I think is not the greatest choice.
Yeah, this goes back to the idea that you are not a regular person. You are someone who races half marathons and marathons. You have to eat a little bit differently, just like you have to train a little bit differently than the person who's just exercising for general health. But Kylee, I had no idea that there was some sort of movement against traditional gels. What is so wrong with a goo or a Cliff gel these days? I remember those were the gels that I fueled my entire running career on. And of course, there's some better options these days. You can go spend like, I don't know, you take out a mortgage for a box of Morton gels, and those might be better for you. But all in all, I'm a big fan of the simple things precisely because they are simple. All right, let's move on. I have a very simple question. Do you think endurance athletes should be taking creatine? I'm seeing a lot of just talk about the value of creatine. And this used to be like your gym bro meathead supplement. And now all of a sudden endurance athletes are thinking about taking it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the research is still, there's not a ton of research on endurance athletes yet, but there is some research emerging on the ability, if you take in creatine, to help with glycogen replenishment rates, post-exercise, potential for increased heat tolerance, and just helping with the recovery process. So it's not necessarily something that it's actually one of the most studied supplements out there, and it's pretty safe. So I don't think everyone needs to be taking it, but for somebody that might be a plant-based athlete, it might be a good option because they're not maybe getting in as much from their diet. And then for somebody that's doing like higher volume training, could be an option for them to explore.
Sorry, I think we had another big pause. Kylee, what is your favorite supplement for runners? Do you have anything that is a good recommendation, even if you might be a very different runner from someone else?
Oh boy, thinking through that, it's tough because I don't really like to generalize supplement protocols for people. Because there are a lot of things that, and I know this message is perpetuated that like, oh, you can just try and get it in through your food. And the reality is that is hard for a lot of athletes to get everything in from their food. I think a problem area is then taking something that has everything in it when you might not need like a greens drink or something, taking everything in, and you might not need everything, and then that's giving you too much of certain things. So I hesitate a little bit when recommending a supplement, like an everyday supplement for everyone, because I think that's difficult sometimes to answer. One I will say that is common that athletes are usually short on and might want to consider taking is magnesium. And magnesium levels for athletes for intake are elevated from the average layperson. And the problem is that the food sources that contain magnesium, even the high magnesium sources, it can make it quite difficult to reach your needs every day for magnesium. And so when you don't have enough magnesium, that can affect your ferritin levels, that can affect your muscle cramping. Cramping's complicated, but it can affect muscle cramping. It can affect nerve pulse in transmission. It has a number of different like enzymatic cellular things that it affects, brain health, all of these different things for magnesium. And I just see a lot of athletes only coming up at about 50% of intake when I do dietary exploration with them. So that's one that potentially doing a supplement might be beneficial. On that note, I do recommend doing a magnesium glycinate or a threonate if you are going to take magnesium. The oxide and citrate will leave you running to the bathroom, so I don't want to be responsible for
that. That is probably worth the price of admission for this podcast, is just knowing the right type of magnesium to take so that you don't make a grave error. Kylee, thanks so much for spending some time with us today and sharing your expertise on all things endurance nutrition. I certainly learned a lot, and I think I'm going to be a little bit more strategic with how I'm patterning my calorie intake throughout the day, because I admittedly backload my calories. I don't have the best eating habits, and I think that's one reason why, if I really want to take my training to the next level, I need to work on those habits, because the training will demand it. So you've given me a lot to think about. Thank you so much. Where can folks find you online? Because I know that you share a ton of really helpful nutrition and diet related content. I know on Instagram, I'm a big fan of the work that you guys put out.
Yeah. So Fly Nutrition 3 on Instagram, and then my website, flynutrition.org. And we actually have a lot of like on-demand classes that we've done and handouts that people can purchase. So if you're not looking for one-on-one help, there are alternatives to that. And then I write a lot for Trail Runner magazine, so you can find articles there that I've written if you want to read more on different sports nutrition topics.
And your website does a really good job at showing what articles you've written for Trail Runner magazine. So I'm going to include links to all of that in the show notes on strength running. Kylee, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.